I discovered my husband's affair on his birthday and made the boldest decision a woman could make in the 1960s. Good morning, my dear viewers. My name is Charlotte, I'm 83 years old, and today I'm going to share a story that completely changed the course of my life. Before I begin, I'd love if you could leave a like on this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and comment where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know where the people who listen to my stories come from. In 1965, I was just 23 years old, married for 5 years to Benjamin, and mother to 2 small children, Mary, 4 years old, and John, 2 years old. We lived in a small town in Nebraska, one of those places where everyone knows each other and secrets travel faster than the wind. It was a pretty town, with a central square where families gathered on Sundays after church, a movie theater that showed films months after they premiered in the big cities, and a simple life that followed the rhythm of the seasons. Our house was 3 blocks from the square. It was small, but I kept it immaculate. I had white lace curtains I'd made myself, a garden with roses and daisies in front, and a backyard where I grew herbs and some vegetables. It wasn't luxurious, but it was our home, built with great sacrifice. Benjamin worked as an accountant at the only bank in town. He was a respected man, always well-dressed in his dark suits and neat ties. Every morning, he left at 7:30 with his leather briefcase under his arm after drinking the coffee I prepared before sunrise. I was proud to see my husband leave so elegant, knowing that at home everything was in order for when he returned. In those days, you need to understand, a woman's role was very different than it is today. I had only studied through what we called junior high, as my father said women didn't need much education since their destiny was to marry and take care of the home. And so I did. I married at 18, shortly after meeting Benjamin at a church summer fair. He was 30, considered a good catch, and my parents were happy with the marriage. My routine was like that of many women of that time. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the family, got the children ready, cleaned the house, washed and ironed clothes, sewed, cooked, tended the garden, and took care of the children. At night, when Benjamin arrived, I already had dinner ready, the children bathed, and I still found time to look presentable, with my hair done and a clean dress. A woman is judged by her husband's appearance and her children's behavior. That's what my mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth, always said when she visited us on Sundays, and I strived to ensure that judgment was the best possible. My children were always clean and well-behaved. Benjamin's shirts were the whitest and best pressed in town. Our house, though simple, shined, it was so clean. I believed I was living in a happy marriage. Benjamin wasn't a man of many words or displays of affection, but he gave me security and respectability. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a ribbon for my hair, a scented soap, a piece of fabric for me to sew something new. They weren't grand romantic gestures, but I interpreted them as signs that he thought of me. On Sundays, we went to church as a family. I wore my best dress, usually one I had sewn myself. I put on a discreet hat and white gloves. The children looked impeccable, and Benjamin always elegant in his dark suit. After church, we would have lunch at my in-laws' house or receive visitors in our home. It was a simple, predictable life, but it seemed secure to me. The evenings, after the children fell asleep, were quiet. Benjamin read the newspaper while I did some embroidery or prepared clothes for the next day. We talked little, but I didn't find it strange. Men of that time weren't ones to talk much about feelings or share concerns with their wives. Topics like money, politics, or work were considered improper for female ears. It was in March 1965 that things began to subtly change. The bank where Benjamin worked hired a new secretary, Alice. She had come from Chicago, where she had studied typing and other courses that qualified her for the job. She was 25, single, and lived with a widowed aunt who had moved to our town years before. The first time I heard about Alice was during a Sunday lunch at my in-laws' house. Benjamin commented about the new employee, praising her efficiency and intelligence. "She's a very capable young woman," he said. "She brought modern methods that are helping to better organize the bank's files." I didn't give it much importance at that moment. It was natural for Benjamin to talk about work, and there was nothing strange about praising a competent colleague. But I remember that my mother-in-law shot a quick glance at my father-in-law, one of those looks that couples exchange when they want to say something without using words. In the weeks that followed, Alice's name began to appear more frequently in conversations. Benjamin told about the improvements she was implementing at the bank, about her innovative ideas, about how the manager was impressed with her work. I listened to everything with polite interest, without suspecting anything. It was in April that I noticed the first change in Benjamin's behavior. He started coming home later from work. At first, it was just 15 or 20 minutes. Then, it became an hour or more. The explanations were always the same. We had to reorganize the files. The manager asked me to finish a report. There was a last-minute meeting. I accepted the explanations without questioning. After all, the work at the bank was important, and I had been raised to be an understanding wife. I would rearrange dinner, keep the food warm, and when he arrived, I would serve him as if nothing was different. In May, I began to notice other signs. A different perfume on his shirts, a sweet perfume that certainly wasn't what I bought for Benjamin on his birthday. Lipstick stains on the white collar that, when questioned, were explained as pen ink that leaked, or must be jelly from lunch. Phone messages that made him restless, calls that he quickly hung up when I entered the room. Still, I tried to push the suspicions from my mind. These are silly ideas, I told myself, as I washed the shirts more vigorously, trying to remove any trace of that strange perfume. Benjamin is a respected man, a family father. He would never do something like this. But the evidence continued to accumulate. Benjamin began to dress with more care, to use more aftershave lotion, to look at himself more in the mirror before leaving for work. He started receiving phone calls on Sundays that he answered in a low voice, saying afterward it was bank business. He began attending evening meetings that had never existed before. I felt increasingly anxious, but I didn't share my concerns with anyone. In those days, marital problems were private matters that should stay behind closed doors. Besides, I was afraid of what people might think or say. Was I an inadequate wife? Was I failing in some aspect? What would my parents, my in-laws, the people from church say? Then, in June, what I feared most happened. It was the day of the annual town fair, an important event that attracted people from all over the region. The bank would close early, and Benjamin had forgotten the lunch I'd prepared at home. I decided to take it to him, thinking of making a pleasant surprise. When I arrived at the bank, it was almost empty. Most of the employees had already left to enjoy the fair. I entered through the side door, used by employees, which was open. The main room was deserted, but I heard voices coming from the file room. I approached silently, without intending to spy, just wanting to know where Benjamin was to deliver his lunch. The file room door was ajar, and it was then that I saw the scene that would change my life forever. Benjamin was there with Alice. He held her by the waist, and they kissed in a way my husband had never kissed me. I heard him say affectionate words, promises, declarations that I had never received in 5 years of marriage. I left the bank without being noticed, carrying back the untouched lunch and a broken heart. I walked through the streets of the town like a sleepwalker, not seeing or hearing anything around me. At home, I looked at the innocent faces of my children and cried silently as I prepared dinner, as on any other day. That night, I served dinner to Benjamin as if nothing had happened. We talked about trivialities, about the children, about the town fair. He didn't mention Alice, or the bank, or the forgotten lunch. And I, gathering all my strength, smiled and pretended that my world hadn't crumbled hours earlier. It was the longest night of my life. Lying beside him, hearing his quiet breathing as he slept, I wondered what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough, what Alice had that I didn't have. Questions without answers that tormented me until dawn. In the days that followed, I lived in a kind of stupor. I continued with my routine, taking care of the house and children, preparing meals, washing and ironing clothes. But inside, something had broken. the trust, the security, the certainty that my marriage was solid. All of this had disappeared in that moment in the file room. I needed concrete evidence, something that could confirm what my eyes had seen and my heart already knew. So it was that, one afternoon, when Benjamin was at work and the children at my mother's house, I decided to do something I had never done before: search his office in our home. I'll never forget that June afternoon. The children were with my mother, who had offered to take them to the park, and Benjamin was at work. The house was quiet, just the tick-tock of the living room clock marking each second of my anguish. My hands trembled as I approached his office, a small room next to the living room, where there was a dark wooden desk, some accounting books, and bank documents. In 5 years of marriage, I had never messed with Benjamin's personal belongings. This wasn't something a respectful wife would do, but at that moment, the pain of betrayal was stronger than any rule of marital etiquette I had been taught. The office smelled of tobacco and the lotion Benjamin used. I took a deep breath and went to the desk. The first drawer contained only office supplies: pencils, pens, erasers, clips, nothing out of the ordinary. The second drawer was locked. That increased my suspicions. Why lock a drawer in your own home, where only your wife and small children would have access? I remembered that Benjamin kept a spare key in the plant pot by the office window. I found it easily, and, with my heart racing, unlocked the second drawer. What I found there confirmed all my worst fears. Hidden under some bank folders was a yellow envelope. Inside it were letters written on perfumed paper, with delicate handwriting that certainly wasn't mine. They were from Alice to Benjamin. Love letters filled with passionate words, promises, memories of intimate moments shared, plans for the future. "My dear Ben," one of them began. Ben. I had never called him that. To me, he had always been Benjamin. "I can't wait to meet you again. Our last meeting at the hotel was magical." Hotel? My stomach contracted. I continued searching and found more evidence. Receipts from a hotel in the neighboring town, 20 miles away. Receipts dated from several Fridays over the last 3 months. The same Fridays when Benjamin said he had evening meetings or business dinners. There were also movie tickets from the Palace Cinema in the neighboring town, movies he never mentioned having seen, and a small velvet case containing a delicate butterfly-shaped brooch, certainly not for me, as I had never received it. I sat in the office chair, feeling the weight of those discoveries. They weren't just suspicions now. They were concrete evidence of a betrayal that had been going on for months. Benjamin and Alice were having an affair behind my back, while I took care of our house and our children, believing I was building a solid family. The tears I shed that afternoon weren't just of sadness. They were of anger, disappointment, humiliation. I felt foolish, deceived, betrayed not just in my marriage, but in everything I believed to be true. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, locked the drawer, and returned the key to its hiding place. No one would know that I had discovered the truth. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan, to decide what to do with that information that now weighed on my heart like lead. In the weeks that followed, I continued my routine as if nothing had changed. I prepared meals, took care of the children, kept the house in order, but I observed Benjamin with different eyes. I noticed every detail of his lies, every excuse to go out at night, every suspicious phone call. He seemed not to notice my silent suffering, or perhaps he didn't care enough to notice. He continued his double life, dividing himself between the role of respectable accountant and husband and his secret meetings with Alice. July arrived, and with it, the proximity of Benjamin's birthday. He would turn 35 on the 15th, a Thursday. 2 weeks before, during dinner, he mentioned that he would like to celebrate the date with a small gathering. "Nothing too big," he said. "Just family and some colleagues from the bank." Colleagues from the bank. That would include Alice, of course. The idea of receiving in my home the woman who was destroying my marriage made me nauseous, but I agreed with a smile. "Of course, dear, it will be a beautiful celebration." It was at that moment that I began to formulate my plan. If Benjamin wanted a birthday party with his colleagues, he would get exactly that. It would be a party that no one in town would ever forget. I started preparations weeks in advance. I economized on the month's shopping to be able to have a nice celebration. I invited not only family and coworkers, but also friends from church, neighbors, influential people from the town. I wanted a considerable audience for what was to come. I sewed a new dress for the occasion, a light blue model that highlighted my eyes and enhanced my silhouette. I wanted to be beautiful, not for Benjamin, but for myself, to remind myself that I was still a woman of value, regardless of how my husband treated me. The parish hall was decorated with flowers from our garden, simple but elegant arrangements of roses and daisies. The tables were covered with white tablecloths borrowed from my mother and some neighbors. I hired Mrs. Louise, known for her delicacies, to help with the appetizers and sweets. But the focal point of the party, the most important element, would be the cake. I ordered it from the best bakery in town, Joe's Bakery. "Mr. Joe, I want the most beautiful cake you can make," I told him. "A 3-tiered cake with chocolate frosting, which is my husband's favorite." Mr. Joe, known for his discretion, didn't ask questions when I gave him specific instructions about what should be written on the cake. He just nodded, wrote everything down in his notebook, and assured me it would be done exactly as I requested. The week of the birthday, Benjamin seemed more distant than ever. He came home late every night, always with different excuses. On one of those nights, Wednesday, the eve of his birthday, he didn't even have dinner at home. He called, saying he needed to resolve some matters at the bank and not to wait up for him. I knew he wasn't at the bank. The bank closed at 4 p.m., and it was already past 8 p.m. when he called. He was probably with her, celebrating his birthday in advance without imagining what awaited him the next day. The 15th dawned sunny, a typical July day in our region. Benjamin left for work as usual, not imagining that I would spend the entire day finalizing preparations for his surprise. The children were excited about the party, helping me put up balloons and decorations in the parish hall. In the afternoon, I picked up the cake from the bakery. Mr. Joe brought it personally, covered by a special box so as not to ruin the decoration. "Are you sure, ma'am?" he asked one last time with a concerned look. "Absolutely," I replied with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. At 7 p.m., guests began to arrive at the hall. Benjamin still didn't know about the party. I had told him we would just have a family dinner. My brother-in-law was in charge of bringing him with the excuse that he needed to talk about an important matter at the parish hall. I observed carefully when Alice arrived, accompanied by 2 other bank employees. She wore a tight red dress that drew attention. Her hair was impeccably arranged, and her lipstick matched the dress. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny. Young, modern, different from me in all aspects. She greeted me with a fake smile, complimenting the decoration and asking if I needed help with anything. The audacity of that woman, to enter the party organized by the wife of the man with whom she was having an affair and pretend cordiality. I responded politely but coldly that everything was under control. At 8 p.m., Benjamin arrived, visibly surprised to see so many people gathered to celebrate his birthday. He smiled, thanked everyone, greeted everyone. When he saw Alice, there was a quick exchange of glances that only I, attentive to every detail, noticed. The party went on normally for about 2 hours. There was music, dancing, lively conversations. Benjamin circulated among the guests, receiving congratulations, acting like the respectable accountant everyone believed he was. Alice kept her distance, talking mainly with her colleagues, but I observed that occasionally they would, accidentally, meet in more secluded corners for quick exchanges of words. At 10 p.m., I announced it was time for the birthday song. The lights were dimmed, and I myself went to get the cake from the hall kitchen where it was kept. I carefully placed the candles, 35, one for each year of Benjamin's life, and lit them. I carried the cake with steady hands to the center of the hall, where Benjamin waited, surrounded by guests. The smile on his face began to fade as he approached, and could read what was written with icing on the chocolate frosting. "Happy birthday, love from Alice." Silence took over the hall. All eyes moved from the cake to Benjamin, from him to me, and then to Alice, who had visibly paled. The bank manager, Mr. Augustus, a man of rigid principles, frowned, his expression changing from confusion to understanding. Benjamin tried to speak, but only mumbled disconnected words. Alice dropped the glass she was holding, the crystal shattering on the floor, just as their secret was shattered at that moment. With a calmness that surprised even myself, I asked everyone to sing Happy Birthday. And everyone did so amid palpable embarrassment. When they finished, I placed the cake on the central table and, looking directly into Benjamin's eyes, said in a clear voice that echoed through the silent hall, "I thought it would be more honest to celebrate the truth today. The movie tickets, the love letters, the hotel receipts, everything was kept in the second drawer of your office. I thought that if the love was so great, it deserved to be celebrated publicly." My mother-in-law let out a muffled groan. My father took a step forward as if to protect me. Alice tried to leave discreetly, but her father, Mr. Robert, owner of the largest fabric store in town and a very respected man, held her by the arm, his face contorted by shame and anger. Benjamin, still in shock, couldn't articulate a defense. He looked from the cake to me, to Alice, to the guests, like a cornered animal. The silence was broken by the bank manager, Mr. Augustus, who approached Benjamin and said in a low voice, but audible to those nearby, "Monday, in my office, at 8 a.m., both of you." I began to cut the cake, serving slices to the stunned guests, maintaining appearances to the end. Many politely declined, others accepted out of not knowing how to react. The party, of course, ended earlier than planned. In less than half an hour, the hall was almost empty. We returned home in absolute silence. The children, tired, fell asleep quickly. Only then did Benjamin try to explain himself. He spoke of momentary error, of weakness, of temptation. He asked for forgiveness, promised to change, said he loved me and that family was the most important thing. I listened to everything without interrupting, without crying, without showing emotion. When he finished, I said only, "The second drawer, Benjamin. For months, while I took care of our children and our home, you kept evidence of your betrayal in the second drawer, thinking I would never discover it. But I did discover it, and now the whole town knows too." That night I slept in the children's room. Or rather, I didn't sleep. I spent hours looking at the ceiling, thinking about what I would do next. I had publicly exposed the betrayal, something unthinkable for a woman in the 60s. I had humiliated my husband in front of all local society. But what would come after? What would be the consequences of that act of courage or madness? The answers began to emerge the very next morning when the telephone rang at 7 a.m. It was my mother, concerned. "What have you done, Charlotte? The whole town is talking. How could you expose your marriage like that?" She didn't ask about Benjamin's betrayal, didn't question how he had hurt or betrayed me. Her concern was with the public exposure, with the scandal I had caused. It was the first of many similar reactions I would face in the days and weeks that followed. In 1965, a betrayed woman was supposed to suffer in silence, forgive, move on. I had broken that unwritten rule and would pay the price for it. But as the phone continued to ring and news of the scandal spread through town, a strange sense of freedom began to grow within me. I had exposed the truth, had refused to be a silent victim. And even though the path ahead was uncertain and frightening, for the first time in a long time, I felt I had taken the reins of my own life. On Monday after the birthday, Benjamin left home early without breakfast. He was pale, with deep dark circles, the result of a weekend spent between pleas for forgiveness and promises of change. I knew he was going to meet Mr. Augustus at the bank. What I didn't expect was the call I received around 10 a.m. "Mrs. Charlotte?" The voice on the other end of the line was from Mr. Augustus himself. "I would like you to come to the bank today, if possible. We have important matters to discuss." My heart raced. What could the bank manager want with me? I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress in navy blue and a light coat over it. I combed my hair, applied a discreet lipstick. Even amid the storm I was living, I couldn't afford to appear careless. I left the children with my neighbor, Mrs. Connie, and walked to the bank. When I entered, all eyes turned to me. Some employees looked away embarrassed. Others observed me with poorly disguised curiosity. Alice was not at her usual desk. Mr. Augustus received me in his office, an austere environment with dark, heavy furniture. He offered me a chair and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Charlotte, what happened at your husband's birthday party was unfortunate." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand your pain and indignation, but I need to inform you of some decisions I've made as manager of this institution." He informed me that Benjamin had been fired. "The bank," explained Mr. Augustus, "was an institution that valued morality and good customs. A scandal of those proportions involving a trusted employee was inadmissible. Alice had also been dismissed for the same reason." "I'm sorry that you and your children have to go through this," he said in a tone that mixed formality and a touch of genuine compassion. "But understand that we couldn't keep both after what happened." I left the bank with contradictory feelings. On one hand, there was a bitter satisfaction in knowing that Benjamin and Alice had lost their jobs. A form of justice, perhaps. On the other, practical reality soon imposed itself. With Benjamin unemployed, how would we support the family? Upon arriving home, I found Benjamin sitting in the living room, his gaze lost. Without his job at the bank, his identity as a respectable man in the community had crumbled. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. "See what you've done?" he accused, his voice choked. "You've destroyed my reputation, my career, our livelihood, all because of a moment of weakness." A moment of weakness. The letters, the hotel receipts, the secret meetings for months on end, all reduced to a moment of weakness. The audacity of those words ignited in me an indignation that I didn't know I could still feel. "It was you who destroyed everything, Benjamin," I replied, my voice firm despite the tears that threatened to fall. "Your choices, your lies, your betrayal. I merely exposed the truth you tried to hide." The following days were ones of heavy silence in our house. Benjamin spent hours away, supposedly looking for work, but I knew he frequented the corner bar, drowning his sorrows and shame in glasses of whiskey. When he returned, he either locked himself in the office or slept on the couch, avoiding my presence. Meanwhile, the community around us was divided. For some, especially the older and more traditional, I was the villain of the story, the wife who didn't know how to maintain discretion, who exposed her husband to ridicule, who should have swallowed the betrayal in silence to preserve the family. For others, especially some younger women, my act was seen as a kind of unusual courage, almost revolutionary. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth, came to visit me a week after the incident. She didn't come to offer support, but to reprimand me. Sitting stiffly in our living room, with her dark dress and pearl necklace, she seemed the personification of judgment. "A wife must know how to forgive, Charlotte," she said, her lips tight with disapproval. "Men? Well, men have weaknesses. A wise wife pretends not to see and keeps her home together." I listened to her sermon in silence, my hands occupied with the embroidery I had started days before, a mechanical gesture to calm the nerves. When she finished, I raised my eyes from the fabric and responded with a calmness that surprised her. "I respect your opinion, Mrs. Elizabeth, but I cannot respect a marriage built on lies. My children deserve to grow up seeing the value of truth and dignity." She left indignant, promising that God would punish my pride. That same night, Benjamin announced that he had gotten a job in a city 120 miles away. An acquaintance of his father had recommended him to work as an accountant in a furniture factory. "It's a fresh start," he said with a flash of old enthusiasm. "We can leave all this behind, start again, where no one knows us, where there's no shame." I looked at him, at the man with whom I had shared 5 years of my life, the father of my children, the center of my world until a few weeks ago. And at that moment, I knew the time had come for the most difficult decision of my life. "No, Benjamin," I replied in a low but firm voice. "I won't go." The shock on his face was immediate. In his mind, I should be grateful for the opportunity to preserve the marriage, to keep the family together, to escape the scandal. He didn't expect a refusal. "What do you mean you won't go? Are you crazy? What will you do here alone with 2 children to raise? How will you survive?" They were valid questions that I had asked myself countless times in recent days, but something inside me, a seed of determination that perhaps had always been there dormant, had awakened. "I don't know exactly how it will be, but I know I need to discover who I am beyond being your wife. I need to show our children that a woman can have dignity and strength even when everything seems to be crumbling." Benjamin alternated between anger and pleading in the days that followed. He tried to convince me in every way. He appealed to the well-being of the children, to the financial difficulty I would face, to society's judgment of a separated woman. He even involved my parents, who came terrified by the idea of their daughter becoming a divorced woman, a term used at the time for separated women, laden with stigma and prejudice. My father, a man of few words and rigid principles, called me for a private conversation in the garden of the house. "Charlotte, think carefully about what you're doing," he said, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "A woman alone, with children to raise, life will be very hard. And what will people say? How will your children grow up without a father?" I looked at the rose bushes I had planted years ago, now flowering and strong. "Dad, if I stay with Benjamin just out of fear or convenience, what example will I be setting for my children? What kind of life will I have pretending nothing happened, swallowing my dignity every day?" I saw in his eyes a gleam that could be of contained tears, or perhaps a reluctant pride that he himself didn't understand. He nodded slightly, squeezed my shoulder with his hand calloused from work on the farm, and never brought up the subject again. Benjamin left on a rainy August morning. He took 2 suitcases with his clothes and personal items, some books, and documents from the office. He said goodbye to the children with lengthy hugs and tears he didn't try to hide. For me, just a distant wave from the door, his eyes still hurt, but already resigned to my decision. When the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of terror and liberation. I was alone at 23, with 2 small children to raise, without a profession, without income, in a society that saw separated women as social pariahs. What would I do now? Practical reality soon imposed itself. Benjamin had left some money, enough for 2 months of expenses if I economized to the maximum. After that, he promised to send a monthly amount for the children's support, but I knew I couldn't depend on just that. In the same week he left, I started looking for work. It wasn't easy. In our small town in the 60s, options for a woman with only junior high education were extremely limited. I was rejected at several stores. The owners, many of them present at the fateful birthday party, didn't want to associate their establishments with a woman of tarnished reputation. Prejudice surrounded me on all sides. Neighbors who used to greet me now crossed the street to avoid encounters. At church, I felt disapproving looks, poorly disguised whispers when I passed. The mothers of Mary's friends no longer allowed their daughters to play at our house. It was Mrs. Connie, my closest neighbor, who extended the first helping hand. A lady in her 60s, widowed for more than a decade, she managed the small municipal library on her own. "I need an assistant for a few hours a week," she told me as we had coffee on her porch. "The pay isn't much, but it would allow you to work while the children are at school." I accepted immediately. The work was simple: organizing books, helping register new titles, attending to the few library patrons. But for me, it represented much more than a way to earn bread. It was the first step in building a new identity, beyond wife and mother. With the little I earned at the library and the irregular financial help that Benjamin sent, we managed to survive, albeit with many limitations. I had to learn to fix things that I would have simply replaced before, to transform leftover food into new meals, to sew not just as a hobby, but out of necessity. The children felt their father's absence, of course. John, still small, didn't fully understand what had happened. Mary, older, asked difficult questions to answer. Why did Daddy leave? Doesn't he like us anymore? When is he coming back? I tried to explain in the simplest and most honest way possible, without demonizing Benjamin, but also without hiding that our marriage had ended. Daddy is living in another city now, because adults sometimes need space. He loves you very much, and the three of us will be fine together. At night, after they fell asleep, I allowed the tears to come. They weren't just tears of sadness or regret, but of a complex mix of emotions, fear of the future, loneliness, but also a strange sense of freedom that was beginning to flourish amid the difficulties. In September, 2 months after Benjamin's departure, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the principal of the municipal school, Mrs. Amelia, inviting me for an interview. They needed someone to temporarily replace a teacher who would go on maternity leave. I know you only have junior high education, said Mrs. Amelia during our conversation. But Mrs. Connie spoke very highly of your dedication at the library, of how you help the children who go there to research. We need someone for the initial grades, and I believe you have the profile. That's how I became a substitute teacher, teaching the first letters to 7- and 8-year-old children. The salary was still modest, but better than the libraries, and the working hours coincided with my children's school schedule. I discovered, to my surprise, that I loved teaching. There was a deep satisfaction in seeing the little faces light up when they understood something new, in knowing that I was making a difference in their lives. The children, unlike adults, didn't judge me for being a separated woman. To them, I was just Teacher Charlotte, the one who told stories with different voices and drew animals on the blackboard. Gradually, a new life began to take shape. A life I had never imagined for myself, but which, in some strange and unexpected way, seemed more authentic than the previous one. I was discovering abilities I didn't know I possessed, facing challenges that before would have seemed insurmountable. It wasn't easy. There were days when the money barely covered the basics, when fatigue seemed to consume every fiber of my being, when the nocturnal solitude weighed like a stone on my chest. There were moments when I questioned my decision, when the idea of having accepted the fresh start with Benjamin seemed tempting in its simplicity. Then I would look at my children, see how they were adapting, how Mary now helped me prepare dinner with pride in her new responsibility, how John had learned to tie his own shoes because Mommy already has a lot of work. And I knew that, despite all the difficulties, we were on the right path. The year 1965 was coming to an end, and with it, my first Christmas as a separated woman. It would be a modest celebration. The gifts were simple, made largely by my own hands, but there was a peace in that simplicity, an authenticity that compensated for the absence of luxury. On Christmas Eve, as we prepared the decorations for our small tree together, Mary surprised me with a question. "Mom, are you happy now?" I looked at my daughter, at her attentive and wise eyes beyond her age, and answered with the deepest truth I had discovered in recent months. "I'm learning to be happy in a different way, dear. A way that is just ours." 1966 arrived, bringing new challenges and opportunities. The teacher I was substituting returned from her maternity leave, but Principal Amelia, impressed with my work, offered me a permanent position as a classroom assistant. The salary was lower, but it still represented a security that I couldn't refuse. January also brought Benjamin's first visit to the children. He arrived on a Sunday morning, driving a borrowed car, bringing gifts and a nervous smile. I kept my distance, allowing him to enjoy time with Mary and John without my constant presence. I observed through the kitchen window as they played in the backyard. Benjamin seemed thinner, older somehow, although only 6 months had passed. Before leaving, he asked to speak with me alone. We sat on the porch, two strangers who once shared a life. "You look well," he said with a note of surprise in his voice. I smiled slightly. "I'm getting by." He told me about his new job, about the city where he now lived. He mentioned that Alice had tried to contact him several times, but that he had refused. It was a mistake, Charlotte, a mistake that I'm paying dearly for. There was no more anger in me, I realized with some surprise. Just a quiet melancholy for what could have been and wasn't. I wished him good luck, sincerely, and promised that the children would always be available for his visits. As the year progressed, my routine became established. I woke up at 5:30, prepared breakfast and school lunches, got the children and myself ready. We walked together to school, me to work, they to study. In the afternoon, we returned home, where I divided my time between household chores, helping with homework, and preparing the next day's lessons. Friday nights became special. That's when we went to the library, no longer as a workplace, but as visitors eager for stories. Mrs. Connie always welcomed us with a smile and set aside new books she thought would interest us. It was there, among the dusty shelves of the small municipal library, that I discovered a passion for knowledge that had lain dormant for years. I began to study on my own after the children fell asleep. First, it was literature books, the classics that I never had time or encouragement to read. Then, pedagogy manuals borrowed from the school that helped me improve my work as an assistant. And finally, high school textbooks, preparing myself for a dream that was beginning to take shape, to complete my studies formally. In July 1966, I discovered that the neighboring town, 20 miles from ours, offered an evening adult education program for those who wanted to complete high school. It was an opportunity and an immense challenge. It would mean 3 nights a week away from home, depending on precarious buses, arriving home late. What would I do with the children? Once again, it was Mrs. Connie who offered me a solution. The children can stay with me on the nights you have classes. Mary is already old enough to help with her brother, and I would love their company. With this invaluable help, I enrolled in the program. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, after dinner, I would take the 6:30 bus and only return around 11 p.m., exhausted but excited about each new learning. In the first few weeks, I felt out of place. A 24-year-old separated woman among 17 and 18-year-olds who had abandoned regular school for various reasons. But soon my dedication caught the attention of the teachers and the respect of my classmates. I became a kind of reference in the class, the one everyone sought to clarify doubts or ask for notes from missed classes. The fatigue was constant, but there was a deep satisfaction in each small academic achievement. At home, the financial situation remained tight, but stable. Benjamin sent money regularly for the children, and my salary, although modest, covered our basic needs. I learned to work miracles with little. I transformed used clothes into new pieces, planted more vegetables in the backyard to save on groceries. I gave private lessons on weekends to supplement the income. The community's prejudice against my situation as a separated woman began to decrease gradually. My work at the school, my visible dedication to the children and studies, my discretion, all of this gradually changed people's perception. Not that I cared so much about it now. I had learned that other people's opinions were much less important than my inner peace and the example I gave to my children. It was in mid-1967, almost 2 years after the separation, that I received surprising news. The state education department had created a special program for the training of lay teachers, those who, like me, already worked in schools without having complete training. It would be an intensive 2-year course, with classes on Saturdays and during vacation periods that would grant an official teaching diploma. Principal Amelia strongly encouraged me to participate. "You have a gift for teaching, Charlotte. With a diploma, you can take on your own class, with a much better salary." I didn't hesitate to sign up, even knowing it would be another challenge in a life already full of them. I was accepted, and in August 1967, I began the course. On Saturdays, I left the children with my mother, who over time had become more understanding of my situation, and traveled to the city where the program was headquartered, 30 miles away. The classes were intense, covering from teaching methodologies to child psychology, passing through all the disciplines I would eventually teach. We were about 40 lay teachers from the region, most of them women, many in a situation similar to mine, struggling to build a career that would provide independence and stability. Among us, a mutual support network formed. We shared not only notes and study materials, but also life experiences, advice on how to balance work, study, and family, shoulders to cry on in difficult moments. It was in this group that I made my first true friendships since the separation. Women who saw me for who I was, not for what had happened in my marriage. One of these friends, Celeste, was a teacher in a rural school and a single mother of 3 children. Her story was even harder than mine. Her husband had abandoned her without any financial help, forcing her to build everything from scratch. "What doesn't break us makes us stronger, Charlotte," she used to say with a smile that defied all the difficulties she faced. At home, Mary and John were adapting well to our new reality. Mary, now 6, took on small responsibilities with pride. She helped set the table, fold clothes, take care of her brother when I needed to study. John, at 4, was a happy and curious child, always asking questions about everything. Sometimes they asked about their father. They were excited about his occasional visits, but our small family of 3 had found its own rhythm, its own happiness. At Christmas 1967, 2 years after the separation, I was able to give myself and the children a special gift. We moved to a slightly larger house, closer to the school. It wasn't luxurious, just 2 bedrooms instead of 1, a slightly more spacious living room, a yard where the children could play with more freedom. But it represented concrete progress, the fruit of my work and perseverance. The move coincided with news that left me with mixed feelings. Benjamin was going to get married again. He came personally to tell me, respectfully, before communicating it to the children. His fiancée was a young widow from the city where he now worked. I wished him happiness, sincerely. Time had softened the wounds, and I no longer held a grudge. I just hoped he would be a present father for Mary and John, regardless of his new family. 1968 arrived bringing winds of change, not only in my personal life, but in the country. They were times of political turbulence, of growing restrictions on freedoms. In the small bubble of our interior town, we felt the effects in an attenuated way, but they were there in the censored news, in the whispered comments, in the fear that began to permeate certain conversations. In the teacher training program, some more politically aware colleagues discussed in low voices about resistance, about the importance of education as a form of awareness. I absorbed everything with interest, but kept cautious. My priority was to ensure the safety and future of my children, and that meant avoiding any involvement that could be considered subversive. In July 1968, I completed half of the training course with excellent grades. Principal Amelia, increasingly impressed with my performance, promoted me from assistant to assistant teacher, with a small but significant salary increase. "Next year, when you graduate, you'll have your own class," she promised. It was during this period that I met Robert, a newly arrived math teacher at our school, a widower about 10 years older than me, with a teenage daughter. He was a kind and intelligent man who soon earned the respect of students and colleagues. We began to talk during breaks, discovering common interests in literature and music. Robert began lending me books, works I would never have access to otherwise. He invited me and the children for a picnic on Sunday, along with his daughter Beatrice. It was a simple and pleasant day, without pressures or expectations. Other similar meetings followed, always including the children, always respectful and relaxed. The community, of course, began to comment. Even 3 years after my separation, many still saw me as the woman who served the cake with the name of the Mistress, that story that had taken on almost mythical contours in the town. For some, I should remain alone, as a kind of penance for having destroyed my marriage. The idea that I could rebuild my love life caused discomfort, especially among the more conservative. My mother-in-law, who had maintained minimal contact since the separation, appeared at my door one day, her face contracted with indignation. "You're setting a bad example for my grandchildren," she accused. "Barely separated and already getting involved with another man." I maintained the calm that I had learned to cultivate in recent years. "Mrs. Elizabeth, it has been 3 years since Benjamin and I separated. He is already married again, and Robert is just a friend who respects me and the children very much. She left dissatisfied, but her words didn't affect me as they would have years before. I had developed a new relationship with other people's opinions. I listened, reflected on what might be valid, and let the rest dissipate like smoke in the wind. Robert and I continued our friendship, which gradually transformed into something deeper. He understood my fears and limitations, respected my pace, never pressured. The children adored him. He had a special way with them, teaching mathematical games to Mary, building kites with John. His daughter Beatrice, initially reserved, also grew closer to us, especially to Mary, assuming a role as an older sister that enchanted her. At the end of 1968, Robert formally asked me to date in the old-fashioned way. He came to dinner at home one Sunday, brought flowers, and after the children went to sleep, expressed his feelings with simple and sincere words. "I don't want to replace anyone in your life or in the lives of your children," he said. "I just want the chance for us to build something new in our own time." I accepted with a light but cautious heart. We established clear limits. Our meetings would continue to include the children most of the time. There would be no physical displays of affection in front of them until they were comfortable with the idea. And above all, we would respect Benjamin's place as a father, never speaking ill of him or trying to replace him. 1969 dawned with promises of achievements. I was in the last year of the teacher training course, about to officially become a certified educator. Robert and I carefully planned each step of our relationship, always prioritizing the emotional well-being of the children. In March of that year, the first class of the evening adult education program, which I had started in 1966, graduated. At 27, I received my high school diploma with Mary and John proudly applauding in the audience, alongside Robert and Beatrice. It was an achievement that seemed impossible when everything crumbled in my life years earlier. In August came another important realization: the completion of the teacher training course. The ceremony was simple but emotional. I looked at my colleagues, many with stories of overcoming similar to mine, and felt a deep solidarity, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Amelia kept her promise. In 1970, I took on my first class as a head teacher, the second year of primary education, with 28 students between 7 and 8 years old. The salary was significantly better, the responsibilities greater, but I felt prepared and enthusiastic. I had found my vocation amid the ruins of what I once believed to be my only possible path. Mary, now 9, and John, 7, flourished. They were intelligent, sensitive, and resilient children. The relationship with their father, although intermittent due to distance, remained healthy. Benjamin had matured over these years, becoming more present in their lives, respecting my role as a mother and primary caregiver. Robert had become a constant and beloved presence in our small family nucleus. His patience and genuine affection for the children conquered even the most skeptical in the community. Gradually, I ceased to be the woman of the cake scandal to become Teacher Charlotte, respected for my work, admired for my perseverance. Looking back at that terrified young woman who served a cake with the name of the Mistress at a birthday party, I barely recognized the person I was. That act of courage or madness, depending on who judged, had been just the first step in a journey of self-discovery and reconstruction that I could never have imagined. The cake with Alice's name wasn't just a revenge against an unfaithful husband. It was a declaration of independence, the moment I decided that my dignity was worth more than any social convention, that my value as a woman didn't depend on a marriage of appearances. If I could go back in time and advise that young 23-year-old Charlotte, frightened about the future after exposing her husband's betrayal, I would say, "Courage, girl. The path will be difficult. There will be days when you'll question every decision, when the weight of loneliness and judgment will seem unbearable. But you'll discover a strength you didn't know you possessed. You'll build a much more authentic and fulfilling life than you ever imagined. And one day, you'll look back and be grateful for having had the courage to serve that cake." At the end of 1970, Robert asked me to marry him. It was a simple proposal, without grand dramatic gestures. We were in the backyard of my house, observing the children playing with his daughter, when he held my hand and asked if I would agree to officially build a life together. I didn't need to think long to say yes. Before setting the date, however, I made a point of talking to Mary and John, who were now 10 and 8. I explained that Robert would not replace their father, that Benjamin would always be important in their lives, but that forming a new family would bring us more joy and stability. The children received the news with enthusiasm. They had already created deep bonds with Robert and Beatrice, who at 15 was a kind and protective teenager with my children. Surprisingly, it was Benjamin who showed the greatest resistance. During one of his visits to see the children, he sought me out for a private conversation. "Are you sure this is what you want, Charlotte?" he asked, his face betraying an emotion I didn't expect. "Marriage is a serious thing. You've already been through a difficult divorce." I looked at him, trying to understand the true root of his concern. "Yes, Benjamin, I'm sure. Robert respects me, loves the children, and we've built something beautiful together over these years." He nodded slowly. "I just don't want you or the children to get hurt again." There was sincerity in his words, perhaps even a flash of what could have been regret. "I appreciate your concern," I replied calmly, "but I've learned a lot about myself in these years. I'm no longer that young woman who accepted everything without questioning." Our marriage was celebrated in March 1971, a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a small reception in the backyard of our house. Only close family members and a few dear friends were present. My parents, already reconciled with my choices. My friend Celeste from the teaching course, Mrs. Connie, who had been my first support in difficult times, Principal Amelia, and some colleagues from the school. Benjamin didn't attend, but he sent a telegram wishing happiness and a gift for the newlyweds, a porcelain set that, ironically, was much more beautiful than what we had received at my first wedding. Life as a family with Robert brought a tranquility that I hadn't known before. He was a man of few words, but consistent actions. He helped with household chores without my needing to ask. He actively participated in the children's education and encouraged my professional growth. We moved to a larger house that comfortably accommodated our expanded family, close to both the school where I taught and the state college where Robert taught mathematics. Mary, John, and Beatrice developed a relationship that was truly fraternal, with the typical discussions and reconciliations among siblings. Beatrice, the oldest, naturally assumed a protective role, especially with John, who adored her and sought her approval in everything he did. In 1972, I received an invitation that would again change the course of my career. The State Education Department was implementing a pilot project for continuing education for teachers, and I had been nominated by Principal Amelia to be one of the regional coordinators. The work would involve traveling to various small towns in the region, training other teachers in literacy methodologies. I talked with Robert before accepting. It would be a logistical challenge with trips of 2 or 3 days per week. Once again, he demonstrated the support he had always given me. "You deserve this recognition, Charlotte. We'll manage at home. The children are more independent now, and Beatrice can help when necessary." So, at 30, I took on this new responsibility. It was work that fulfilled me deeply, sharing knowledge with other educators, many of them in situations similar to what I had experienced years before, without adequate training and dealing with few resources. I saw myself in those rural teachers who faced long walks to their isolated schools, who taught multi-grade classes in improvised rooms, who bought school supplies with their meager salaries so that the poorest students wouldn't go without. On trips through the interior, I carried with me the lessons that life had taught me about resilience, about finding strength where there seemed to be none, about transforming adversities into opportunities for growth. I didn't tell my personal story, of course. The episode of the cake with the name of the mistress had been left behind, although occasionally in more distant towns, I would hear distorted and exaggerated versions of that story, like regional folklore. The 70s advanced, bringing changes not just in my life, but in the country. We lived in politically difficult times, with curtailed freedoms and a climate of fear that affected even our work as educators. We learned to be cautious about what we said in the classroom, to carefully evaluate the books we used, to transmit certain values subtly between the lines of the official curriculum. In 1974, Mary entered the normal school, following in my footsteps in the teaching career. At 14, she already demonstrated the determination and sensitivity that would be her hallmarks as an educator. John, at 12, revealed a talent for numbers that made his stepfather Robert especially proud. Beatrice, now 19, had entered the nursing college in the state capital, returning home only on holidays and vacations. Benjamin maintained regular contact with the children. His second wife had given birth to a girl, Lucy, with whom Mary and John developed an affectionate relationship as half-siblings. The wounds of the past had healed, giving way to a mutual respect between us. When we met at events related to the children, we were able to converse civilly, even exchange a few words about our current lives. On one such occasion, at John's junior high graduation in 1977, Benjamin sought me out during the reception, while Robert was talking with other parents. "You've done an exceptional job with them, Charlotte," he said, his gaze sincere. "They are extraordinary young people. I'm grateful for everything you did, even when things got difficult." That late recognition brought a sense of closure that I didn't know I still needed. "We did the best we could, each in our own way," I replied, "and they really are special." At the end of that decade, at 37, I received an opportunity I would never have dreamed of when I served that fateful cake, a scholarship to take a higher education course in pedagogy, part of a government program to qualify teachers in practice. It was an intensive course, with classes concentrated during school vacation periods and some weekends throughout the year. Robert, once again, was my biggest supporter. "You've always wanted this, Charlotte. It's your chance to have the university degree you deserve." It was an intense period of studies. I was no longer young, and competing with colleagues fresh out of high school required an extra effort. But the practical experience I brought from the classroom and from the teacher training work compensated for what I lacked in youthful energy. I graduated in 1981, at 39, with a final thesis on literacy in rural contexts, which was praised by all professors. The 1980s brought new challenges and joys. Mary graduated as a teacher and soon after married Paul, a young engineer she had met during a visit to the capital. John entered the accounting college, following a different path from his father, but still in the area of numbers that attracted him so much. Beatrice became the head nurse at the regional hospital, got married, and presented us with our first grandson, or rather, grandson of the heart, since biologically, he was Robert's nephew. In 1985, at 43, I was invited to assume the direction of a newly inaugurated school in the outskirts of the city. It was an immense challenge. The region was deprived. Many children came from families in vulnerable situations. The building had a precarious structure and basic resources were lacking, but I saw there an opportunity to make a difference in a broader way. Robert, already near retirement as a teacher, decided to accompany me in this new project, voluntarily taking on math reinforcement classes for students with more difficulties. We formed an efficient duo. He with his infinite patience to explain the same concepts in different ways until the student understood. I with my ability to mobilize the community, get donations, involve parents in the school life of their children. We transformed that school into a space of welcome and true learning. The walls, previously gray, were painted with vivid colors by the students themselves. We created a community garden that not only complemented the school meals, but taught science in a practical way. We organized a collection of books from donations, since we didn't have an official library. It was at this school that I remained until I retired in 1997, at 55. On the day of my farewell, former students from various generations appeared to thank me. Among them was a young teacher who had been my student in first grade and now would take over my literacy class. "You changed my life," she said emotionally. "When I entered your classroom at 7, I barely spoke. I was so shy. You were the first person who really listened to me, who believed I could be more than circumstances allowed me. Today, I'm here to continue your work. Retirement didn't mean inactivity. Robert and I dedicated ourselves to an adult literacy project in the rural area, traveling twice a week to remote communities. It was volunteer work, done with the same love and dedication as always. Seeing 60-year-old men and women learning to write their own names for the first time brought an indescribable satisfaction. The 2000s arrived, bringing both joys and the inevitable losses of age. Robert passed away in 2005 at 77 after a brief battle against an aggressive cancer. It was 34 years of a happy marriage, of true partnership, of quiet and constant love. His departure left an immense void, but also the certainty that we had built something beautiful and lasting together. I moved forward, as I had always done in the face of adversities. My children, now adults with their own families, were my greatest pride and consolation. Mary had become the principal of the same school where I had retired, continuing the work I had started. John, after years working at a bank, opened his own accounting firm, employing young people from the underprivileged community where he had grown up. Beatrice, although not my biological daughter, was just as close, visiting me regularly and including me in all family celebrations. In 2010, at 68, I received a tribute I would never have expected. The school where I worked for so many years was renamed after me, Charlotte Smith Municipal School. Seeing that plaque at the entrance of the building, now renovated and expanded, was one of the most emotional moments of my life. At the ceremony were 4 generations of former students, from those already gray-haired from my first class to freshly literate children. Today, at 83, I look back and see that terrible moment when I discovered Benjamin's betrayal and made the impulsive decision to expose it publicly through a cake was, in fact, the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and fulfillment that I would never have lived otherwise. It wasn't easy. There were moments of despair, of doubt, of tears shed in the solitude of night. There was prejudice, judgment, closed doors, but there were also extended hands when I needed them most, unexpected opportunities, the discovery of strengths I didn't know I possessed. Benjamin passed away 3 years ago. I attended his funeral alongside our now adult children. There was no more hurt or resentment, just the understanding that we are all human, imperfect, capable of both hurting and healing. Alice, curiously, was also there. I recognized her immediately, despite the decades that had passed. After the ceremony, she sought me out, visibly nervous. "Charlotte," she said, her voice trembling, "I never had the courage to tell you, but I ask forgiveness for the suffering I caused. I was young, selfish, didn't think about the consequences." I smiled and held her wrinkled hands between mine, equally marked by time. "It was so long ago, Alice. Life took us on such different paths, and in the end, perhaps it was better this way." And indeed it was. That cake with the name of the Mistress, which at the time seemed like a catastrophe, a humiliation, an end, was, in fact, the beginning of everything. The beginning of the independent woman I became, of the educator who transformed lives, of the mother who raised strong and upright children, of the wife who found true love based on mutual respect. If I'm here today sharing this story with you, it's because I believe that no pain is in vain when we transform through it. My message for anyone facing what seems to be the end of everything is trust. Trust in your inner strength, even when it seems non-existent. Trust that there is a path ahead, even when the darkness is so dense that you can't see the next step. And remember, sometimes it's precisely when everything seems to be crumbling that we are, in fact, building the foundations of something much more beautiful and authentic than we could ever have imagined. That cake with the name of the Mistress wasn't the end of my story. It was just the first chapter of a full life that I myself wrote with my own hands, one day at a time. My dears, I hope my story has touched your hearts. If you've made it this far, I would very much like you to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel to hear other stories of overcoming like mine, and share with someone who perhaps needs to hear that after the storm always comes fair weather. Don't forget to comment what you thought and where you're watching from. Each of your comments brightens my day and makes me feel that my story was worth telling. Thank you very much for listening to me with such affection.